Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be creating a simple web calculator using our HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So without wasting much of our time, let's get going. For us to be able to write code on our mobile phone, we'll be needing a code editor. There are various code editors out there like the VS Code, the Sublime, the SPCK, Thread Edit and so many more. But my favorite is the SPTK. It's a very powerful code editor made specially for your mobile device. And the best part of this is that it's free. You just have to go over to your app store and install the SPTK. The link is in the description below. All we need to do now is to create a file. The name of the file doesn't actually matter. We just need a file where we can write our HTML code. Okay? So I'm going to be using index.html. Always remember to add the extension of your file, which in this case is the .html. Now click on enter and we just got our development environment ready. So there's one other software you need to install, which is the codeboard. Now the codeboard gives you access to a whole lot of functionalities and keyboard shortcuts like the Ctrl+A for select all, Ctrl+Z for redo and so many more. So once again, head over to your app store and install the codeboard. Now after that, click on this part of your keyboard and select it to the codeboard. So you'll notice our HTML template is divided into two parts, which is the body and the head element. The body element is where all our buttons, text and all those graphic stuffs will be written, while the head element is meant for things that are not visually seen on our website, like the title, the meta, the script and so on. So we're going to head over to the body tag and we're going to create our very first button. Okay, so button and click enter. So we'll clear this a bit, and in between the buttons we're going to be creating our very first text. Okay, so we're going to put in click me and hit enter, and we got the text displayed. So this is just how it works. You create a button, then in between the button text you write a text that you want to be displayed. For us to create this web calculator, we're going to be needing a series of buttons, an input and a div element. The div element is just like a container where we are going to be writing most of our code. Okay, so we create a div element and give it a class so we can be able to style this in the future. Okay, so let's give it a class. I'm going to be using container and hit enter. Okay, so in between this div tag we're going to be creating a button. So let's create the button. So button and 1. Okay, so if we should run this, we have a button that has 1 inside. Okay, so we're gonna create a bunch of this. So let's try button, create button 2, button 3, button 4 and the end. Okay, so if we should run this, we discover that the buttons are stacked horizontally, side by side, and we don't want that. So we actually want the buttons to be stacked right on top of each other. So for this, we're going to be using the P tag. Now this P tag is a paragraph. This means each 3 buttons or 4 buttons, as the case may be, should be created in a separate paragraph. So let's write to this code P, and you're going to copy all this and paste it. Okay, so recopy and paste it into 4 places. So we are going to write the code, and after which we are going to run it. So if you should run this code, now you discover that they are placed right on top of each other. So the next thing we are going to be doing is to create an input. So I want you to head back to your code and type input and number. Now this tells our code to display an input that strictly accepts just numbers. Okay, so we're gonna leave the ID. Later on in the CSS part, I'm gonna be explaining what the ID does and the class and the rest of them. So you're gonna be seeing the way this affects our code. Okay, so Now we're going to be transforming this from this weird looking stuff to something like this with our CSS. So I'm going to pause this video now for most of you who haven't subscribed and liked this video, so you're going to do that right now. So pause. So we are going to be changing the appearance of our button to look like the one on our calculator using the CSS. So let's head back to our code. Now, there are two ways to write a CSS code, either by embedding it in the HTML file or creating a new file just for the CSS code. So we're going to be trying out these two ways, but to start with the embedding. You need to go over to the head section of your code and we're going to type style. The style element helps us to write CSS code in our HTML file. So I want you to go over to the head section of your HTML and create the style element. So style, and now write button, curly brackets, and enter. So in between the curly brackets, type background, then colon, and red. So if we should run this, you discover that our button is now turned to red. Okay, so this is the way CSS works. This part of the code is called the CSS selector, and it helps us to target a particular element which we want to style in our HTML file. And this other part is called the CSS property. This shows the exact thing we want to change in our CSS element. So in this case, we want to style all the buttons in our HTML element and we want to change their background color to red. So let's clear this a bit, and we're going to be assigning a CSS property that will change the weight of our button. Okay, so type width colon 70 pixels and semicolon. Okay, so if we should run this, you discover that our width is a bit stretched out. So let's kind of make this into a square. For this, we'll need to increase the height. So go back to your CSS and we're going to type height, then colon 70 pixels, then semicolon. Now, if we should run this, you discover that our button is in a square shape, okay, but we want it rounded. So for this, we're going to use another CSS property that will actually give it a curvy edge. Okay, so type border radius colon and 35 pixels. Now this will give it a kind of a round shape, and if we should run this, that's exactly what we get. So the border radius is a CSS property that is used to make the edges of elements a bit curvy. So if you set the border radius to half the length and width of our button, it becomes a circle. So we're going to give a bit of spacing around our button. So for this, we use the margin. Now the margin gives space around the HTML elements. So type margin, then colon, and we're going to set it to 6 pixels. So if we should run this, you discover that there's a bit of spacing around it. So the next thing we're going to do is to increase the font. So for this, type font size and set it to 50 pixels. So if we should run this, I think it's big enough. So let's create a new CSS selector for the div element, since it's the element housing our entire calculator. So if we should change the color of the div element, it will reflect in the background of our calculator. So type div, curly bracket, and hit enter. So in between the curly brackets, we're going to be assigning our CSS values. So we're going to type background color colon and black. Okay, so if we should run this, you discover that it's now black. The background is black. Okay, so let's go back and now let's set the height to about 510 pixels and the width to 345 pixels. I actually checked the exact height and the width of our final calculator, so that's why I'm just giving the values like this, but you can actually change it and play around with this each way. So if we should run this, you discover that nothing really changed. We're just preventing our calculator from expanding when we have a bigger screen. So the next thing we're going to set is the border radius. You notice in our final project, the border of our calculator is a bit curvy, the edges a bit curvy, so we're gonna do that right now. So you guessed it, I'm gonna be using border radius and colon, we're going to give it 15 pixels, px and colon. So run your code and all the edges are curved. So this is looking more like a calculator, other than the fact that the input button is a bit small. So we're going to change that right now. So head back to your code and we're going to create a new CSS selector. So type input, curly brackets, and in between the curly brackets hit enter. So now we are going to increase the size of our input button. So type height and we're going to set it to 100 pixels. So if we should run this, this is what we get. So we need to stretch this out a bit. So for this, go back to your code and we're going to type width and set it to 330 pixels. So now if we run this okay. So once again, we're going to use the body radius to make the edges curvy. So go back to your code and type body radius and set it to 10 pixels. Okay, so we run this and it's curved. And the next thing we're going to do is to give a bit of space around it, because you kind of notice there is a bit of overlapping. So we're going to give a space around it. So go back and type margin and we're going to set the margin to 3 pixels. So if we should run this, I think it's good enough. So there's one more thing we need to add to this calculator. If you noticed in our original project, you discovered that we have some colored buttons, which are the special keys. So we're gonna do that right now. So I'm gonna show you exactly what the class does. So before that, let's remove this black line around our buttons. So type border and set the border to none. Now this should remove the lines around it. So if you run this, discover that the lines are off. And we're going to do the same thing to our input as well. So go back to your input and type border and set it to none as well. And now you can change the margin to around 5 pixels. This will still be the same. So I want you to see the class as a special name given to a group of related elements. In this case, we have a group of related special buttons. Okay, so we're gonna give each of them a class so we can style them together. So head back to your code and we'll go to the first button, which is a plus, and then we'll give it a class and we're gonna name it special. So after this, we'll move to the next special button, which is the minus, and give it the same class, and then move to the next one and give it a class special, and the next the same. And over here we're gonna give, because this place contains just special buttons apart from 0, so I'm gonna be giving all of them a class. So move over to the style element and type dot special. Now the dot tells our browser that this is a class, so it goes to look for it. So type curly brackets, and in between the curly brackets you type background. So I actually use a color picker to find the exact color which I need. So if you're actually interested in getting a color picker for your development, please comment "I'm interested" in the comment section below, and I will send you the direct link to get one for yourself. So paste the hex code you got from your color picker in the background, and if we should run this, we should get exactly what we have in our original calculator. So you notice our calculator doesn't actually do anything. So in our next video, we're going to be using JavaScript to make our calculator functional. Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel to keep us going. And don't forget, this is Medroom, where we stay productive, stay creative, and always remember to keep it simple.